All right, I am showing that it is 12 noon here in Colorado. We have people still joining us, so feel free to continue to introduce yourself in the chat area. But we will go ahead and get started with today's session. Before we start with our main presentation, I just wanted to do a brief overview of CSL in session and what to expect in case you haven't joined us before. Many of you are probably familiar with your regular webinars where it's sort of one-way communication, but that is not what we're going to do today. We like to kind of shake things up, get you all thinking and participating, so we're hoping to have a discussion about today's topic. And the main way that you guys will be participating is using the chat, which the majority of you have already done so in terms of introducing yourselves. We do have a poll for today's session. I don't believe we have any multi-chats for today's session, but we will have you fill out a poll. If for any reason you need to get a hold of me, I am Christine Krieger and I am the Professional Development Consultant for the Colorado State Library. You can find me in the attendee list, and it's just labeled Colorado State Library way up in the upper left-hand corner. And you can hover over that and start a private chat with me. If you are having audio issues or things, I can help get you sort of on the right path, a couple things that you can try. We are also recording today's session, and the archive will be available hopefully later this afternoon, as well as some resources. You are welcome to ask questions anytime throughout the session. If it's something that is urgent, I will possibly interrupt Amy, and we'd like to keep things a little bit less formal to make sure that you get your questions asked. You don't need to raise your hand to ask a question, but you can tell us to speak louder or softer. You can put something in the chat if you miss something. Applause is always welcome. So that is sort of how we are going to do today's session. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. We have Amy Hitchner, who I am delighted now works for us at the Colorado State Library, and she is our statewide collaborative programming.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I also have trouble with that title. It's like far too long. So thank you so much for asking me to be part of CSL in session. I think that this webinar series is a really important service, both inside and clearly beyond Colorado, as we see from all the different folks joining us from around the country. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everyone for joining me. This session is called Leading Doesn't Have to Be Loud, and our main focus is going to be on introvert leadership. And we are going to actually just jump right in with a little bit of a quiz here. So as we advance the slides, I'm going to ask you right off the bat, why are you here today? Why are you joining us? And we have a little poll, and Christina, oh, you're going to do that. Okay. We have a little poll for you to answer. Helps us get a little bit better idea of who's joining us and why you have found value in coming here today. So just go ahead and you can select as many as you want, by the way. So your choices are, I'm an introvert, I work or live with an introvert, I want to learn more about introverts in the workplace, or I wanted an excuse to hide out in my office during lunch. And so you can pick as many of those as apply to you today. I would probably pick number 4. Okay, looks like we've got the introverts are leading the pack. We've got 88.3%. We've got some folks who live or work with introverts. They're at right around 34%. About a little over half of you want to learn more about how introverts can work better in the workplace. And, oh, come on, only 4.4% of you wanted an excuse to hide out. I'm not buying it, folks. Okay, that looks pretty stable. Okay, so it looks like we have quite a few introverts in our audience today, which was one of the reasons why I came up with this presentation in the first place. This presentation, I'll talk about this on the second slide. This presentation was actually delivered at the Click Pueblo workshops last year, and I got some really great feedback from it, and I'm going to tell you about it in just a second. So why am I here? We know why you're here. I'm here because I am an introvert, believe it or not. Some people don't and some people do. I'm interested in introverts as leaders. And I want to make the workplace better for all types of people, not just the ones who talk the loudest. So I mentioned that I gave this presentation at Click Pueblo last year, and some of the responses that I got made me realize that this was a really important topic for people. Um, I had responses such as, I thought there was something wrong with me my whole life. And that just really, oh, that made my stomach hurt. Another person told me, I've never heard anyone say that it is okay or normal to be quiet, a quiet person. Someone else said, I didn't think I could be a leader if I was quiet. And then finally, another person told me, people don't believe me when I tell them I'm an introvert. They tell me I'm too friendly or outgoing. So that's a myth we're going to tackle here in this presentation. So I think we should just forge on ahead. Clearly, people find resonance with this topic, and I like talking about it. So before we really get into introverts, I want to introduce the concept of introversion by framing it with a discussion about personality. So let's talk a little bit about how introverts and extroverts fit into the broader topic of personality. And there is a fellow I would really recommend reading his book or watching his TED Talk if you can. His name is Brian R. Little, and he's down here at the bottom. I've got a quote from him. And he's also in the very last slide in this presentation. But he wrote a book that I just really found resonated with me. And it was called Me, Myself, and Us. And Brian Little is a personality psychologist. And his big thing is that our personalities are made of three basic parts. We have biogenetic traits, which are relatively stable over the course of our lives. And introversion and extroversion is one of those traits. So if you are an introvert, there's probably a biological component to it, and we're going to talk more about that later. Then we also have adaptive behaviors, which are based on our environment and our social and cultural expectations. So you adapt to certain things over the course of your life, and that can kind of tweak some of the stuff you were born with. And then finally, and what I think is most interesting, is we have something called free traits. So those are the little behaviors that we can engage in when we are pursuing a particular goal. So if you have something you're really passionate about, you can engage free traits and maybe do something that's outside of your comfort zone or outside of what your personality would normally have you do. And I think that that's a really interesting way to look at what makes up our personality. So let's talk a little bit more about what those 5 big traits that have a genetic component are. So you can see here we've got kind of 5 facets, and each one of them is on a continuum. So you have agreeableness on one side and disagreeableness on the other, and you can be anywhere along that range. It's not an either or proposition. What I really want to point out is that none of these traits is good or bad. We don't want to associate those words with these traits. For instance, disagreeableness may not seem like something that you would like about yourself or like in others. However, people who have a high degree of disagreeableness have higher levels of like job success, which I found really interesting. And look at like something like neuroticism and emotional stability, either ends of the spectrum there. People who are described as having high levels of neuroticism are very aware of what's going on around them in their environment, and that can backfire on them sometimes, but sometimes you really need to know what's going on around you in your environment so that you can pick up on little cues. So the point is that none of these is good or bad. It's just showing you that they're on a spectrum. And it's also important to point out that none of these is a type of person. They are really just facets that make up your personality. So to summarize that part, introversion, extroversion is just one of the 5 big traits. Each of these is on a continuum. And again, I want to really point out that you can act out of character to achieve a goal. That's that free trait that we talked about a few slides back. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk a little bit about the myth of the introvert. I realize that was a pretty brief and high-level overview of personality. So if you do want to go and read more about it, I highly recommend that Brian Little book, Me, Myself, and Us. Yeah, Me, Myself, and Us. It's a really great read. So in the text box where you guys have been putting your little comments, what I would like you to put down are some of the words that come to mind when you think about introverts, what others have maybe assumed about you, or what you have assumed about someone who is an introvert. So just some words. Yep, we've got already, they're already coming in. Shy, quiet, antisocial, stuck up. Yes, that's a common one. Rude, unfriendly, pushover. Wow, this is really, this is really hitting the mark with a lot of you. Standoffish, yes. Cold, terse, aloof. My goodness, thesaurus people should be watching this. A walking carpet. Snotty, reserved, egotistical. Yeah. Um, so there's a lot that's kind of loaded into that term introvert, isn't there? And feel free to put more down there if you want. Um, I've encountered a lot of these, both when I tell people that I'm an introvert, or when you hear people talk about introverts. They tend to use things like shy, reserved, uptight, antisocial, that kind of thing. Unimportant, yikes. Woo. Yeah, we got to break through that, don't we? Okay, so when I tell people I'm an introvert, especially after I get done presenting, most people would not believe me. You're an introvert. No, it's not possible. You're too outgoing. You're too friendly. You know how to talk to people. You know, all those kinds of things that are based on the misconception of what an introvert actually is. So here's what people have told me they think an introvert is. They think that they're shy, they're awkward, they're misanthrope, they're bookish, they're boring, and then all those other lovely adjectives you have all put in the comment box on the left. And again, it's really a misconception that introversion is equivalent to these words that we're talking about. Um, let's see. I want to talk about what an introvert actually is. So here's my working definition. An introvert is someone who is overstimulated easily and who needs lower levels of stimulation in order to recharge. And I'm going to come back to that word recharge over and over throughout the presentation. But I want you to think about that for a second. And if you are an introvert, maybe that resonates with you. So someone who is overstimulated easily and who needs lower levels of stimulation in order to recharge. Nothing in there about being shy, being antisocial, being bookish, none of those things. It's not that you can't be those things and be an introvert, it's just that they aren't equivalent. And I love the idea. When I hit upon that word recharge, it just opened up my eyes about what the actual problem was, because I felt so drained by a lot of things. I felt like I would go and interact with people or in groups, even going to the mall, I would get so exhausted. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can everybody else seems to be able to do this okay? Why can't I do it? And it's because I needed to recharge. I just needed to recognize that about myself. And there's actually a biological component to this that I think is super important, and it was another huge light bulb moment for me, that there really is a genetic component behind what makes an introvert and an extrovert. We actually are wired differently. So we have this thing called a neocortex, and it's the center of our higher mental functions. So spatial reasoning, conscious thought, language, and sensory perception. And as you know, our human brains are trying to reach like an ideal level of arousal in that neocortex. And it turns out that introverts have a naturally very high state of neocortex arousal. So we are constantly trying to kind of decrease the level of stimulation that's around us so that we can get down to that ideal neocortex arousal level. Extroverts, on the other hand, have a naturally low state of neocortex arousal. So they're trying to find more stimulation to bring them up to the ideal level of neocortex arousal. So that's a really interesting thing to think about. It's not just, oh, I'm shy, I don't want to be around people. No, it's that I have a lot of stimulation in this part of my brain, and I really need to take breaks sometimes and find ways to be by myself or quiet so that I can kind of lower that level and come back down to a normal, acceptable state. And it just made a light bulb go off in my head when I read about that. It made so much sense. Oh, and by the way, there are ambiverts. In case you were wondering, just like all the other big five traits, everybody's on somewhere on that scale. People who are in the middle of the introvert and extrovert scale are known as ambiverts, and they do well with both types of stimulation. So kudos to you if you are an ambivert. It must be a great place to be. Okay, so now that we have a working definition of what an introvert is and what an introvert is not, let's talk about introverts as leaders. And this is the part where I tell you that you do not need to be an extrovert to be a great leader, but you do need to know yourself so that you can manage your energy and to find your personal style. So let's take a look at some people who would be considered introvert leaders. People ranging from Warren Buffett to Laura Bush to Mahatma Gandhi to Abraham Lincoln and Albert Einstein. So, a wide variety of leaders. But as you look at that list, at least for me, I see people, regardless of whether I agree with their politics or whatever they've done with their careers, I see people who tend to think a little bit more about problems, who tend to need more time to reflect before they come back with an answer, for good or for ill. But that's what I see when I look at these people. People who are deeply, have a lot of conviction and are able to influence those around them, but aren't necessarily brash or need to fill up space with lots of words. So if you can think of anyone else who might be considered a famous introvert leader, feel free to pop that into the comment box as well. These are just the ones that jumped out at me. Okay, so you might be looking at this and thinking, well, that's great, but I don't really want to be a CEO or a director or the president of the United States. And maybe you do, and that's fine, but maybe you really kind of like where you are in your position, or maybe you'd like to be the supervisor of circulation or something a little bit more kind of attainable at this point in your life. And you're going, well, how does any of this apply to me in my own position? And I would say it's time to think about leadership in a slightly different way, not as a position or a title, but something that you do in whatever position you are in. So, in talking about leadership, I like to think about it as creating change by bringing others along with you. Um, a good leader is connecting with people and bringing them along towards some kind of a goal. So they're creating change, bringing others along with them. And notice that you don't really have to be a specific person in the organizational chart to make that happen. And in fact, some of the best leaders that I have encountered are people who don't have a fancy title. So consider your own workplace. Who are the leaders that have influence but no title? And you don't have to put it in the chat bar. Um, and who has a title but no influence? And I really recommend that you not put that in the chat bar because this is being recorded. But you know who they are. And what can you learn about leadership from both of these types of people? And what does that say about your own style of leadership? What can you bring to the table from the position that you're in right now where you are? Um, Another thing about leadership that I think is really important is you're bringing people along with you. And how do you do that? You do it by influencing, and you influence more when you have trust with the people around you. I think that people who have high levels of introversion are actually very trusted by those around them because they take the time to listen, to be present with them, to ask questions, to be authentic, and they're working on those one-to-one relationships rather than broadcasting out to a group. So they're really building their influence at a micro level, that person to person um, level, and that will actually spread the more that you embrace the fact that you are a leader in your own way. Um, and so if that sounds like something that you can do or are already doing, then yes, I agree with you. You are probably already a leader in your own position, or you're well on your way, and you might not have even realized it. So we're going to keep coming back to that idea too, that leadership is gained through influence, and influence is gained through trust. And how do people trust you? When you are authentic, when you're true to yourself, and when you embrace who you actually are. Okay, so in order to build your leadership potential, let's say you all of a sudden realize, oh my gosh, I really am a sort of leader in my organization, regardless of my title. And I want to build that. I want to take it to the next level. And that could mean a lot of things. That could mean looking for a promotion, but it could just mean being more satisfied in your job. It could mean creating a better work environment for yourself and others. There are many ways that this can take form. So, to build your leadership potential, think about starting with your strengths. This was another aha moment for me when I was doing a lot of research on introvert leadership. I thought that, I had to turn off parts of myself and try to turn on parts that I was really weak at. Um, I'm really bad actually at on the fly conversations. I can never find my words quite right. I stumble over things, and I think that's true of a lot of introverts. We write better than we speak. Um, and then I replay in my head the conversation I had, and it sounded dumb, and I should have chosen a different word. And why can't I think ahead the way that I can when I'm writing? So I was trying really hard to make certain parts of me better that I just wasn't naturally good at. Um, yes, somebody Larry just wrote, yes, not good off the cuff. I'm terrible off the cuff. I have tons of notes right now that I'm looking at. But, you know, when I realized that I didn't have to turn around things that I was bad at, instead I could take something that I was good at and make it better. Wow, that was a huge revelation. So here's some things that um, people who are introverts might be good at. You might not be, but find what you are good at. So learning, okay, like how can that be a good leadership skill? Well, I would say that any person who is a great leader is probably a good learner. You might be a good writer. You might be good at listening. You might be good at mediating between people, or creating things. Maybe you're a very creative person. Maybe you're great at creating those relationships between people. Planning is another one that introverts tend to be good at. And if none of these are resonating with you, I recommend picking up a book called Strengths Finder, which is a really hard word to say for me for some reason. Strengths Finder. Pick up the book Strengths Finder. There's a little code you can go online and you can take this little test, and it'll tell you kind of some of your strengths, and that will help you figure out how to start building from there. So think about your strengths. Keep it in the back of your mind. We're going to be doing a little bit of an answer in the chat bar here in just another slide or two. Oh, someone even wrote, performing improv comedy helped me speak off the cuff. Yes. Yeah, I've thought about doing stuff like that. And growing up, I was a pianist and I used to have to perform a lot. So going back to that idea of Brian Little's three components of personality, you have your biogenetic, you have your adaptive, and you have your free traits. I adapted to being able to perform on stage as a result of playing the piano. So I think that has helped me a little bit, but I still get just as nervous as ever whenever I have to stand in front of people or hold a webinar. So that doesn't ever go away from me, but you just learn to adapt to it.
And Amy, really
Okay.
quickly, since we're talking about free traits, Brenda had asked a question. If you're drawing on a free trait to do something, are you still truly being?
Yeah, that's something that Brian Little addresses in his book. Um, all those parts make up who you are, who your personality is. If you get so locked into this is what I'm genetically supposed to do, then you are really resigning yourself to a certain kind of determinism. Like you're kind of limiting yourself. Now, the opposite of that, though, is that if you are constantly trying to kind of fake it till you make it, um, depends on what you're making essentially. But if you are constantly in that mode um, of using your free traits to kind of live a different life or turn yourself into somebody that you're not, then it will take a toll on you psychologically and a lot of times physically. You can become ill from doing that over long periods of time. So you know, when I think about free traits, so I'm giving this webinar right now, and it's not really in my comfort zone, and it's not really something that I wake up in the morning and go, hooray, I'm giving a webinar today. But it's really important to me to talk about this subject with people who I think need to hear the message. So I engage some free traits to do this, and I call it kind of turning on the switch. And then when I'm done, this gets turned off. And then I pretty much go into like little mini hibernation mode for a while and recharge my battery. So I think that's really what's meant by the whole free trait thing, is that you can do things that are outside of your normal biogenetic and adaptive traits for short periods of a time to accomplish a goal. But if you try to live like that for a long time, it's going to really wear on you. And maybe something to illustrate that. Before I went back to go to school to become a librarian, I was working at a bookstore and I was a sales manager. It was a terrible job for me. I had to be on all the time. I had to constantly deal with customer issues, with employee issues, with corporate issues. Um, and I was just getting completely worn down. And I didn't really understand why. I didn't understand why I felt like the battery was just drained all day long. And then all of a sudden, it made sense when I realized that that's really not, I was trying to be somebody that I wasn't for a long period of time, for years and years. Um, so now, if I had gone back and had to do that job again, would I do it differently? Oh, yeah. Like I would manage my energy a little bit better. I wouldn't try to be the super peppy up, on all the time person, but I also might not have chosen that particular job either. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. I think the free trait thing is something you have to turn on for little bits of time to accomplish a goal. And then you also need to understand where your actual strengths lie and where your personality lies. So I hope that helped clarify for you. Okay, so in the previous slide, we talked about identifying some of your strengths, and hopefully some of you thought about that for a little bit. What are some things that you are naturally really good at? And I'll tell you some of the things that I thought of when I was creating this presentation. I really like to write, um, and I like to organize things, and I like to kind of keep up on what's happening on social media. So that kind of naturally turned into some other things that got me out of my own head and got me working with the people around me a little bit more. So I liked to write, so I started writing more for blogs for professional reasons. I liked to keep up on social media, so now I tweet for professional reasons. At my previous job, I liked to organize things like potlucks, and I organized and started a book club. I started leading more projects from a project management perspective. So I took stuff I was good at and I just tried to make them, like, to amp them up a little bit, to amplify them. So what I want you guys to do now is think about, and you take that strength that you were thinking about in the previous slide, or maybe it was a couple strengths, and then project forward. How could you use that either in your job or in your personal life? How could you build on that to amplify that leadership potential? And when you have something, if you feel like you want to share it, go ahead and pop it down into the chat bar down below. I'd like to see what people are thinking about, or how you, maybe something that you have done at your work, maybe not something you will do, but something you have done that takes that skill set that you already know you're good at and moves it up a notch. Let's see what we've got going on in the chat bar. And while we're doing that, I'm going to read Deborah's comment. Yes, she worked as a rehabilitation counselor and would talk all day long and be so drained. Yes, there are certain things that I know will drain me, and now I'm getting better at recognizing what those things are and planning for them. So if I know I have a lot of social activities going on in a certain weekend, I try to build in times where I know I won't be social. Or maybe the next weekend I tell myself, this is our relaxation weekend. Or for instance, today I'm giving this webinar. I haven't scheduled a meeting right after this. I would be a mess. So I try to build a little bit of buffer time to just kind of sit quietly, have a cup of tea, and just recharge. Okay, we've got some great stuff coming in on the chat bar. So Colorado, okay, so Christine says that she's doing a lot more training as part of her collaboration skill. Angie is presenting financial literacy workshops. Wow. Mindy is writing a newsletter, so another writer out there. Christy is using her creativity to organize adult craft programs. Um, Nuala is using her collaborative skills to put together a presentation at Click Spring Workshops. Hooray! Amanda is a planner, and she does some team projects, so doing some project management. We have another Amanda who's great at writing and organizing and working with teens, who's leading a teen book club. That's wonderful. Cheryl is great at seeing the big picture. Yes. Isn't that funny? I feel like if you're not the one always talking and you're just observing, sometimes you get that big picture perspective that other people seem to miss. So you've put in some workflow improvements as a result. Great, great example. Matilda is great at interviewing. Wow. And you're reading about improving your listening skills. And Brenda is making some organizational tweaks and some district-wide changes. Michelle is a listener. Okay, great. You know, it's funny. Listening is such an important skill, and I don't think that we don't really give it enough credit. You know, when you're really in the presence of a good listener, when you felt that they were not, they were, you know, the world could have been falling down around you guys, and they were just completely locked in on what you were saying. That is such a gift to give to somebody. And Sally her skills are explaining budgeting and collection development. Jessica is great at learning and writing and organizational skills, and she is a great grant writer. Now that is definitely a skill you could be collaborating with people around your library and your institution on. Love these examples. I agree, Christine. I would love to work with all of you. So yeah, keep popping them in there. If you think of others as we go along, feel free to put those in there as well. It's just a way to get you thinking about let's let's build on what we are already good at, and let's not worry so much about what we're not so great at, because I tell you what, in most work environments you're working with other people and everybody has their own strengths they're bringing to the work environment anyway, so chances are there's somebody who's going to be good at that thing you're not good at. That's fine. That's why we have teamwork. And Lorna's got oh, she's good at building relationships. Yep, thinking of new ways to train. Brenda's great at problem solving and listening. Yes, so that's really great for customer service. And let's do one more. We got Andrew, who likes to write blogs for his library. Much better way of expressing my ideas versus a speech or presentation. I can totally get behind that. I tell you what, it takes a lot of energy to present. And again, like I said, I'm not very good or articulate in the moment as I wish I could be. When I see a wonderful speaker present, I think, wow, how do the words just roll out of them like that? It's amazing. It's mind-boggling. But this is a passion for me, so I do like to talk about it. Okay, next we're going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to talk about managing your energy at work. And I think you could probably transfer a lot of this to managing your energy at home as well, depending on what your home situation is like. So it's not necessarily focused on leadership, but you may find that as you're engaging in more leadership activities, you might start to feel drained a little bit more. And so you might need to come back to these and think about how can I recharge my battery at the end of the day or in the middle of the day. And the first thing that I would recommend is to just be authentic. You can engage those free traits once in a while, but at the end of the day, you really need to find out who you are, what makes you tick, and be real about that. Because, like I said, if you keep trying to fake it, you're going to drain your energy and eventually your credibility. Most of us can spot people, at 100 paces who are faking it, and there's just something a little ugh about that. Like you just don't want to put your trust in somebody who doesn't seem comfortable with themselves. So, whatever strengths you're coming to this with, embrace those and be authentic to them. Because you don't want to end up like this sad, sad little unicorn who's not really a unicorn. Be your own unicorn. Okay, the next thing is to do the draining stuff first. This is a picture of my phone from my last job. I hate talking on the phone and I hate answering voicemails. I think, what's the point? Just send me an email. But whatever, that's neither here nor there. I hate talking on the phone, and I've heard from a lot of other introverts that they don't like it either. um, there's something about that unpredictability. You don't know what the other person is going to say when you pick it up, and you can't plan for it. It's not that you don't like people, but you can't plan. You can't, if you're not good at speaking off the cuff, then speaking on the phone to a coworker or a stranger is just the worst. So, we can't just turn off our phones and say, I'm not using the phone anymore in my job. I mean, most places of employment will not accept that answer. So, um, yeah, Christine just said we can order pizza online. Amen. Yes, you can do it online. You don't have to talk to a person. But because we do have phones at our jobs most of the time, I find that the longer I put it off, the more rings, the longer that flashing light blinks, the more dread fills me. And pretty soon it becomes something where I don't even want to pick it up anymore, or I'll let it roll over to the next day, which is horrible. So my strategy is do it first. Do the draining stuff first. If you have to have a hard conversation with somebody, do it first thing. Don't sit and stew about it for the rest of the day. Introverts, we live in our little heads. We go round and round about things, and we invent these wonderful, fantastical conversations that will happen and how horrible they're going to be. And um, it gets worse and worse inside our own heads. So come in the door, find the things that you're dreading, and just do them first. That's my advice. Michelle writes, I just don't like phones because you cannot end the conversation as easily as when someone is in front of you. Yes, amen. Okay, the next little tip for managing your energy at work is to try and manage your space as much as you can. Now, obviously, we have to meet the demands of our jobs, and some of you are, patron or customer facing librarians. You are dealing with people all day long, and sometimes you don't really have the control over your space that other people in different types of library jobs have. So um, I get that some stuff is out of your control, but where you do have control, try to create a space where you can focus and have fewer interruptions. So at my previous position, my voicemail said, hi, this is Amy Hitchner. Feel free to leave me a message. Or for a faster response, see the little incentive there? For a faster response, go ahead and email me. And then I give them my email address. Most people would rather have a faster response. So that kind of directed them towards my email. The other thing too is I could answer email from anywhere versus sitting right there at my desk answering phone calls. Um, the other thing I would recommend if you work in a particularly noisy place and you need to get some work done is there's a wonderful website called simplynoise.com, and it's just white noise. Well, there's actually white noise, pink noise, and did you know there's brown noise? I had no idea. So if you go to simplynoise.com, it's free. You just go there and it plays white, pink, or brown noise for as long as you want to. It's great. It's a noise canceling kind of a thing. Um, I would just put on my headphones, put on some Simply Noise, and all of a sudden this giant cubicle farm that I worked in became so much easier to deal with. So find the little ways that you can create that little oasis for your brain in the middle of a busy or hectic environment. Let's see if anybody has suggestions. Jamie says, one thing I appreciate about the library, if I'm needing a break from social interaction, I can start shelving or shelf reading. Amanda says you can also get a white noise cell phone app, so that's great. Yep. Okay, so we're brainstorming, and if you have other ideas about how to manage your space to give your brain a little break, feel free to drop those in the comment bar for everyone else to see. Yes, there is a rain sound site. Michelle says that there's a rain sound site. There is one, and I'm blanking on what it is called, but I think if you just type, just Google rain white noise or something, it'll come up. So the big message here is that if you're an introvert, you need to recharge. This is not like um, a preference or something. This is actually something that your brain is telling you need to do. So don't apologize for it. It's part of who you are. It's part of being authentic to yourself. And As we move on to the slide after this, I want you to really be thinking about ways that you like to recharge during the day at work or maybe at home. But the big point I want to make is that it is okay to tell people I need to take a break right now. I'm a little overwhelmed, or this is, there's a lot going on right now. I just need to take a moment to myself. That is perfectly fine to say to people. Okay, seeking balance. So we know that being an introvert at work doesn't mean that you just get a free pass to sit quietly in an office all day. We don't just, wave that flag and say, "Oh, sorry, introvert card. All you extroverts have to do all the public-facing work, and we're just gonna sit back here and be quiet the rest of the day." That's not realistic. That's not how the world works. So how do you find a balance between the stuff that drains you and the stuff that energizes you? So here's some examples of things that drain me: meetings, large group work, networking events, conferences, that kind of stuff. Those are very draining to me. Energizing, passion projects, small group work, so one, two, or three people working on something together, and some scheduled work alone time. So what I want you to do is to think about what drains you at work, specific things, and then what energizes you. And maybe think about how you could put those little energetic moments, or as Brian Little calls them, restorative niches, how you can insert those into your day. Do you need to take a walk during lunchtime? Do you need to go to the gym before work? Something that can create a little restorative niche in your day. So go ahead and pop those into the comment field as our little audience participation. So again, the question is, what drains you? And then what energizes you? And then if you want to go a step further, how could you insert that into your regular workday? So draining, constant interruptions, energizing, a walk outside, yes. Being out in nature, taking a walk. Difficult people drain Sandy, but running energizes her. Kirsten, reading during breaks and lunch always helps, yes. Nuala's energizing moment is her morning walk with her dog. Sonia says that a 30-minute lunchtime walk. I'm seeing a lot of walks here. Getting away from my desk at lunch, walking outside, draining, lots of phone calls and interruptions. I hear that. Christine says, I spend time coloring in an adult coloring book. Yeah, those are so much fun. I have a collection of those and they're mesmerizing. Matilda says, draining things include long interactions with upset customers, and energizing is sunbathing outside. Sounds like we have a bunch of nature folks in our introvert group today, getting outside, taking a long walk. And then we've got naps, closing the door, eating my lunch outside, draining committee meetings, yes. Draining me is interruptions and tough patrons, energizing by listening to books on the drive to and from work. I really like that idea. I think it was Angie. When I was commuting a lot, it was so stressful, and I was listening to like the morning radio shows to get the traffic report, or whatever it is. And boy, I would get to work and to be so stressed. I would start my day stressed out. And then I don't know, maybe 5, 6 years into doing that job, I thought, why am I not listening to something that I really enjoy and that puts me in a place of ease during my commute? So I got an Audible subscription. I started checking out audiobooks from my library, through my Overdrive app, all that kind of fun stuff. And it made my commute just so much more pleasant. So I do recommend stuff like that. Draining, emails and unscheduled interruptions. The unscheduled thing is coming up a lot of interruptions. And that is something that I don't think that the extroverts around us realize is something that drains us. And it's not that we can tell them to quit interrupting us. That's not appropriate either. But the kind of the drive-by, if you will, oh, hey, you're here, let me interrupt what you were doing and put your brain in a completely different place for a few minutes. Yeah, that can really disrupt whatever's going on. I remember having kind of almost like a meltdown one day at work about this unscheduled lunch thing. I brought my lunch. I was really excited about my lunch. And then all of a sudden, last minute, hey, everybody, let's go to lunch. And my whole little like thing that I had, my whole plan for my lunch just came crashing down because now I had to think about, now we have to pick a place for lunch, and now we have to go to lunch, and now we have to worry about how we're going to do paying the bill around the table thing, and it's just completely disruptive. I don't know if anyone else gets like that, but the unscheduled interruptions is can put a real fly in the ointment sometimes. Oh my gosh, you guys have put some really wonderful things in here. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to keep moving on because we have about 15 minutes left. But please, as you are thinking about what energizes and what drains you, throw them in the comment box. Okay, I like to call this section How to Play Nicely with Others. And I think this really is a section that both extroverts and introverts can learn some stuff from, hopefully. Um, there are some interesting dynamics that happen when different personalities come together in the workplace. We all have different needs and we have different preferences and we have, kind of different genetic components to us, but we all need to find productive ways to work with each other. And by respecting different styles and and preferences, creates trust in an organization. So think about these questions as we go through this section. How can you advocate for what you need in an office environment while still respecting other personalities? And how can you help create a work environment that isn't weighted towards one type of personality? Okay, so my first strategy on how to play nicely with others is using humor. I love this little this little cartoon cracks me up. I'd love to hang out, but I have to go sit in my house by myself. Which I wish I could say that to people. I wish I could say, "Gosh, that thing that you're proposing sounds really awesome, but I'd really just rather sit in a quiet space with my, tablet or watching Netflix for a couple hours." Um, Now, obviously, if you are somebody who doesn't use humor a lot in your day-to-day interactions, I don't recommend using this route to tell people that you're an introvert and you need some extra space because it can come off as like passive aggressive. So if you are already somebody who uses a lot of humor in your day-to-day interactions, then it might be kind of funny, like, oh, I'm having an introvert moment, everyone. I need to step back. I need to, have an hour to myself right now. The second one is you got to respect your extroverts. You have to understand that they have energy needs too, like we talked about earlier. They are constantly looking for ways to kind of stimulate and have more energy in that neocortex. So it's important that while we want them to respect and understand us, we need to respect and understand them. So the the pop up like head over your cubicle wall, or the person who stops by suddenly to ask you something for the millionth time that day, they're not doing it just to annoy you. And it's important to remember that they also have their own energy needs. Another thing about extroverts is they think out loud a lot. We think in our heads almost too much sometimes, where we need to just tell people what we're thinking. They tend to think outside of their mouths a lot. The way I think of it is like it's almost like there's a second brain outside of their mouth. I know this sounds really stupid, but it's like outside their brain, and that's where the action's happening. When you're around somebody who's doing that, as an introvert, it can get very confusing. You start to ask, are they telling me to do something or are they just thinking out loud? So it's really important that you stop and ask clarifying questions. Did you mean that you wanted me to do this? Or is that an action you are assigning to me? Because it might make your extrovert coworker stop and go, oh, no, 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 I was just thinking out loud. So understand that they do that and understand that you need to clarify when you think something is actually an action. And then finally, it's okay to advocate for your needs. It's okay to tell somebody you need to have a moment where maybe you have two back-to-back meetings with that person. I need to take 5 minutes and just kind of clear my head, and I'll come right back to you. Okay, another kind of tip or trick or whatever you want to call it when you're dealing with work relationships is to put those relationships in perspective. I think that guilt plays a really big part in introvert psychology. We we feel bad because networking seems like a chore, but we feel like we should do it. We tend to prefer more intimate relationships with boundaries. between work and home, and yet somehow we're getting this message that we have to be on all the time. Our phones have to be on, we have to be answering email all the time, and that line between work and home is very blurry, and we feel guilty that we don't really feel comfortable living that way. And I'm just here to tell you that it is okay to put those boundaries in place. I actually think that networking, like in that traditional sense, is very overrated. I think that focusing on building very few relationships and then expanding from there is more powerful, and it creates longer term relationships in the end. So again, that micro leadership, though, those little micro moments where you can just have a conversation is more important than handing out your business card to 50 people at a conference. Um, I think things go better in the long run that way. And then regarding the whole work and home life, I think it's important to learn how to prioritize different types of relationships. They aren't all equally important, and you shouldn't feel guilty for valuing some relationships more than others. There are lots of people who don't seem to mind mixing work and personal, but I think that it's okay to establish boundaries, and many of us need that kind of segmentation in order to clear our minds. And when we come to work, we are present and ready to be there and not just exhausted because we felt like our entire home time was also work time. And then finally in this section, um, this is just some general stuff for making meetings better for everyone, both introverts and extroverts. Some little tips and things that have worked for me and for other people who have been great meeting facilitators. The first thing is to send your agendas ahead of time. Why do you want to do this? So couple reasons. Introverts don't like surprises, as we've just discussed, so they need time to process what's going on in the agenda. Now, I will say that introverts, the onus is on you too here. If someone sends you an agenda, make sure you read it so that you're ready to talk, but or to do whatever you need to do in that meeting. But go ahead and send your agenda ahead of time, and plus, it's just a courteous thing to do for all types of people so that they can plan and know what they're walking into to discuss. The second is to solicit written and verbal feedback. So have different ways that people can give you feedback, which becomes even more important in larger meetings. Maybe you offer a back channel discussion instead of forcing people to kind of popcorn style, jump out there with their ideas. Give people different ways to give you feedback, and you will find that they'll gravitate towards the one that they like the most. Um, and then avoid forcing snap decisions unless it's absolutely necessary. This is not where introverts do their best thinking. And I'm assuming that most of you want the introverts to do their best thinking. So try not to force a snap decision if you don't need to, or put people on the spot when you don't need to. It creates a lot of resentment, but it also, like I said, just it doesn't put people on their best footing. Um, and that's what we want to encourage is for people to do their best thinking at work. So we are almost at the end, and I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions in case we had some. So in summary, I just wanted to come back to this idea of leadership, that leadership is really coming from a place of trust and not from a title that someone gives you. You don't have to imitate anybody else to be a great leader. You can just be who you are because authenticity is at the basis of trust. Know what you need to be as an introvert or as an extrovert, as an ambivert, as somebody who's highly neurotic or very agreeable or whatever. Know what you need, but also know that you don't need to be labeling yourself all the time, and that you can employ certain skills and traits to reach goals that you have. So it's a good balance to know how to strike with yourself. And then for my introverts out there, we live in our heads so much. We have whole worlds in our heads. And to really take that leadership potential to the next level, think about how you can take those thoughts, those things that you are good at, and put them in action and create the influence that's going to bring people along with you in the changes that you're making in your work environment. So that's what I had for today. I do have a slide at the end where I briefly talk about some resources you can read. I've got the book Quiet by Susan Cain, which is wonderful, the Brian Little book I've been referencing, a couple of blogs, and I do encourage you to watch Brian's TED Talk. And I believe Susan Cain has at least one, if not two, TED Talks as well. So that's what I had for you. And I do appreciate you taking the time and engaging. We had so much wonderful conversation happening in the chat window on the left. While we're wrapping up, does anybody have questions? Not that I, know the definite answer to them, but I will try and help out.
Amy, Michelle had asked, so as an introverted supervisor, is it okay to say things let me think about it before responding to a question, or is that frustrating for staff? She has a lot of people have been kind of chiming in, but it'd be great to hear your view on that.
I would definitely say, let me take a moment. If it was my own supervisor, I would rather that person say, give me the relevant information, let me process it, and come back to you with something that I've taken the time to really consider, rather than, oh, you need a decision, let me give you a decision. Sometimes I don't want a decision that's made on the fly. I need someone to help me think through a problem. And again, it goes back to that trust issue. Do you trust somebody is really taking the time to listen to you and to come back with a reasoned response? That goes so much further than, let me just tell you what I think off the top of my head. I definitely think it's okay to take some time. Matilda says, how do you pursue leadership opportunities that typically come from extrovert-oriented environments like group lunches? Boy, that's a tough one. Matilda, I have a hard time when I go to conferences. I feel like I'm really overwhelmed. Those kind of high pressure networking environments, or, like you're describing. I tend to find one or two people, even if I don't know them, and try and connect with them on a personal level and form that relationship, um, rather than trying to engage with the entire group, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but that's what I tend to do. I try not to worry so much about, touching base with every single person at the table. Instead, I try to start a real genuine conversation with the person next to me. And I think that more times than not, that's going to turn into something fruitful than the other kind of scenario. See, any other questions that are rising to the top here?
And this is Christine. Feel free to continue typing in your questions. I just want to do a bit of a wrap up as well. So continue typing, and we have a couple minutes to still address. But I did want to quickly mention that our next CSL in session is on April 28th at noon, and we have Linda Hofshire, who is the director of the Library Research Service, will be leading a lively discussion and also sharing practical tips for getting started with outcome-based evaluations at your library. And then the URL, and I'll put this in the chat, the URL that is on your screen now is where the archived recording of today's session will appear later this afternoon. But I also have a survey for you all to fill out about today's session if you would take a few moments, and I will put that in the chat as well.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Megan asks, I found myself in a leadership position that I'm excited about, but don't feel others are as excited, which makes me question my work and myself. Is there a way to support myself? Doing this kind of stuff, Megan, is huge. There is a book called Quiet Leadership that I recommend you checking out. And, I think too, introverts tend to kind of internalize things that they see, like little nuances and things that are around them. I would recommend that you maybe not put as much emotional stock into that, um, to really think about, are you proud of yourself? Are you looking forward to this? You have ideas, you're excited, and try to focus more on that and surround yourself, at home and at work as much as possible with other people who are also excited for you. Um, I am a people pleaser for sure. I do not like conflict. I don't like it when I know that somebody doesn't like me. And I realize that that holds me back sometimes because I don't take steps forward when I'm worried that someone's going to not like it. And so part of that's just, um, you know, identifying your strengths and being excited for yourself and trying really hard not to worry so much about how other people are going to perceive it. There's no really good mind hack for that one, but as surrounding yourself with as many supportive people as possible and relying on your own intuition is really important too. Cheryl says many introverts gravitate towards behind the scenes work and then it's hard to get credit for the work. Yes, yes they do. Yes they do. It's it's important to do a little self-promotion once in a while. It might not come naturally, but sometimes you have to say, hey, I wrote that blog, or hey supervisor, here's 10 amazing things I did this month. Sometimes you do have to toot your own horn. Thanks, Chris. I'm glad you enjoyed this session. And another thing, as you know, regarding the not getting credit for the work, some people don't give you credit for the work, but I think a lot of other people are recognizing it and noticing it too. I didn't realize how many people thought about this kind of topic until I started talking about it, and then all of a sudden the introverts came out of the woodwork, and people started telling me all over the place how they see this dynamic happening around them and how they appreciate other introverts. So when you see another introvert in your workplace and they're doing a great job, tell them they're doing a great job, or maybe send it in an email so you don't interrupt them. Ha ha ha. Thank you everyone for coming. Oh, thank you, Matilda. And if anybody would like to stay in touch, again, let me jot my Twitter handle there. There's my Twitter handle, and I will also put my email in the chat as well. Perfect. Wow, I'm so glad that so many of you got something out of this. I encourage you all to keep reading and learning more about this. This is a really interesting topic in brain science right now, and there's a lot of research being done. So yeah, keep on the path and keep learning more. Keep learning all that you can.
Well, and this is Christine, and I want to thank everybody again for joining us today, and to thank Amy. And I think we can see from the chat that, given different forums and things, that introverts also have a lot to say. And I also appreciate the extroverts who joined us for today's session, and who shared some really good thoughts. And I think it's a good continuing conversation to have at our various workplaces. So once again, thank you all for attending. And I will get the recorded archive up on the CSL in session page today. And I hope everybody has a really great afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.